G'day comrades, welcome to the Mind in 1500 Words, Season 3, Episode 7, Dixon, Reyes, Leppert and Pappas, 2008, Personality and Birth Order in Large Families, in Personality and Individual Differences, Volume 44, Issue 1, page 119 to 128. Hey everyone, long time. For this episode, we're returning to the series on papers in developmental psychology. In following how a typical lower-level subject might be constructed, we find ourselves in a chapter on personality development. Let's start with a reasonable question. What influences how personality develops through childhood? This is a question which Dixon et al. Attribute to Galen, a philosopher in the Roman Empire in the 2nd century CE, ignoring several hundred years of work in that tradition, for some reason. Anyway, one obvious place to look for what influences personality, not ignoring at least the ancient Greek philosophy, is in the family. What might parents and siblings do to change the child's patterns in thoughts, feeling, and behaviour? One thing that will come up here is birth order. While this might seem like a claim that fits along with pop culture stereotypes like the overlooked middle child, there is actually research on whether birth order makes a difference to personality development. Here's something a textbook might say. Quote, Dixon et al. Studied 361 siblings belonging to large families and found that younger siblings were significantly more extroverted in terms of sociability compared to older siblings. End quote. Does the Dixon et al. Give us reason to believe that younger siblings are more extroverted? Well, with enough caveats, yeah, I guess. The first of these being that when they say large families, they really mean it. All families in this study were at least 6 kids, with the largest being 16. Most of the sample were Mormons. Dixon et al. Chose this number because they cite 5 studies that found no effect of birth order on personality for families of 5 or fewer siblings. But why think that birth order might have an effect on personality development at all? Well, Dixon and colleagues are inspired largely by Eysenk's theory of personality. Eysenck thought that personality varied along 3 dimensions he called extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. Although personality is measured using self-report questionnaires, unlike other trait theories you might come across, Eysenck wasn't just interested in describing personality. He attempted to provide at least hypothetical explanations for variation in traits. Take, for example, extroversion, which is what we're interested in today. People with high extroversion scores describe themselves as more sociable, active, impulsive, and the like than those with low extroversion scores. Assuming that this is an accurate reflection of how people feel and act and not just how they talk about themselves, Eysenck hypothesized that variation on this dimension could be explained by individual differences in baseline arousal. Those with high extroversion scores were hypothesized to have a low resting state of arousal, leading them to seek more stimulation through, for example, socializing, to get their arousal up to a level that feels good. Those with low extroversion scores, in contrast, were thought to have high baseline arousal, so they would, for example, need to seek activity less often to maintain a desirable level of arousal. Dixon and colleagues extend this kind of thinking to birth order. They suggest that overall, children born later, so with more siblings their whole lives, develop a lower level of baseline arousal because they are born into a more stimulating environment, with more people around all of the time. As kids, they learn to expect a highly stimulating environment from a very early age. Such kids become more extroverted adults in order to avoid their level of arousal becoming distressingly low. If this is right, then differences in extroversion scores should be detectable in later born and early born adults. However, because this would be only one influence of many on baseline arousal, the effect might only be large enough to be easily observable in very large families. Dixon and colleagues had 394 people from 42 families complete Eysenck's personality questionnaire, which measures extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism by asking subjects about their behaviours, thoughts, and feelings. It also has a separate lie scale, which contains items like "I've never stolen anything," in an attempt to determine how much people try to make themselves look good on the questionnaire rather than answer honestly. Dixon and colleagues exclude those with the highest 5% of scores on the lie scale from their analysis. All those included in the analysis were adults when filling out the questionnaire. So this study doesn't track how personality develops through childhood, or adulthood for that matter. Rather, Dixon and colleagues are drawing inferences about differences in childhood development from observable differences in adulthood. To see if birth order was related to scores on this personality questionnaire, Dixon and colleagues performed a series of t-tests, comparing first the mean scores for the first and last born child of each family, and second, the mean of the 3 eldest to the 3 youngest in each family. The only personality dimension that was significantly different in both analyses was extraversion. Neuroticism was never found to vary, and psychoticism was found to vary between the oldest and youngest sibling, but not between the 3 oldest when compared to the youngest 3. In both analyses, there was a 99.8% chance that the younger siblings rated themselves as more extroverted than did older siblings. There isn't much to be gained for us today going through all the controls, but it's worth noting that in their modelling, Dixon and colleagues didn't consistently find that gender or number of siblings was related to personality scores. So, what have we got here? A signal that, as predicted, later-born children in large families tend to rate themselves as more extroverted than their older siblings. Throw in some standard assumptions, and we can interpret this as evidence that in large families, the younger siblings are more extroverted than older siblings. There was some signal here that there may be an effect for psychoticism, but that wasn't consistently detected, so we'll stick with extroversion. Turning back to our textbook quote, yeah, there is evidence that younger siblings in these large families are more extroverted. There are some caveats that this is extroverted in Eysenk's sense, and we mean really large families, and the assumption that self-report is a good measure of personality, and we're okay. What about the larger theoretical claim that this is because younger siblings in these huge families develop a lower baseline level of arousal? Do we have any support for that? Sure, indirectly, the observed effect is predicted by that account. However, this isn't a very secure inference. Dixon and colleagues don't compare alternative accounts, and we can easily think of alternative explanations for why younger siblings become more extroverted. Maybe they are simply used to having more people around, so they become more sociable to meet that expectation. This wouldn't necessarily relate to arousal at all. More directed testing of alternative accounts and where they make different predictions would be needed to secure this kind of theoretical claim. Thanks for joining me today. As always, I'm doing what I can to try and get healthy enough to get these on a regular schedule. Next time will be a paper in the New Papers on Consciousness Studies series. Hopefully that's next week, but, 12:37.